Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Tiramoussa Semifreddo. That's right, we're doing a frozen mousse that tastes like tiramisu using this very easy time-tested Italian technique. And while this might seem like more of a warm weather dessert, at the end of the video, I'm going to make a very compelling argument for why this is the perfect thing to serve after a heavy, rich, holiday special occasion meal. So prepare to be compelled. But first things first, and to get started, the first thing we'll do is separate some eggs, which a lot of people are scared to do, and in the business we call that separation anxiety. So to get over that, let me show you a foolproof method. Okay, all we have to do is crack an egg in a bowl, and then simply get in there with a clean hand and get your fingers under the yolk. And as you lift that out, the white is going to slip between your fingers, leaving that yolk in your hand, which you can then transfer into one bowl, and then transfer the white into another. And I find this a very foolproof method for people that have trouble with the shell-to-shell method, or the crack it right into your hand method like I usually use. And then what we'll do once we have 4 eggs separated is go ahead and set aside the whites. Okay, we can just leave those on the counter. And then we'll take our yolks, and we will add some kind of dark roast instant coffee. And what you see right here is a dark Italian roast from a certain Seattle-based coffee chain, but any high-quality instant dark roast coffee will work. And then to that we will also add a little splash of Marsala wine. And then we will follow that with a little more than a little touch of sugar, which kind of looks like a lot, but it's not, since this recipe is going to make like 10 portions. And then what we'll do is take a whisk and give this a quick mix, just to combine those ingredients before we head to the stove, where we're going to briefly cook these yolks using the most dangerous, most terrifying method ever. And yes, I am exaggerating slightly to build tension. But what we'll do with a towel in one hand and our whisk in the other is cook this mixture stirring over medium-low heat until it thickens up a little and is hot to the touch. And yes, this is generally done over gently simmering water, but if you're brave and a little bit crazy, you can do it directly over a pretty low flame and achieve the same results in a much shorter amount of time. Plus, it's way more exciting this way. Oh, and a couple pro tips, first of which is do not catch that towel on fire. And above and beyond the whole towel catching on fire thing, if our heat's too high, we're not going to be able to catch this at the perfect moment, and we'll end up with coffee and Marsala flavored scrambled yolks, which I've never tried, but they don't sound great. Okay, so we'll pretty much whisk constantly over medium-low heat, and we're basically done when we get to what's called the ribbon stage, which means the stuff dripping off our whisk form ribbons on the surface that are visible for about a half second to a second. So at this point, mine was looking pretty good. And just to give you a rough idea, that took me about 6 or 7 minutes. And we'll go ahead and set this aside while we move on to our final 2 very simple components. The first of which would be whipping up those egg whites. But before we do, let's add a very, very, very tiny pinch of salt. All right, like barely a quarter of a small pinch. And besides a very tiny bit of seasoning, they say that little bit of salt will help the whites whip up a little better. And what we're shooting for here is fairly stiff peaks. Right, we don't want this meringue to get super dry and chunky, but when we're finished and we pull the whisk out of the mixture, those whites should be sitting up pretty high and proud on the end, and hopefully look something like this. And that's it. Once our whites are done, we can set those aside, and we can finish the last component, which is whipping up some ice cold heavy cream. Okay, the colder the cream is, the faster it gets thick. And by the way, if you do your whites first, we can use that same dirty whisk for the cream. But don't do it the other way around, since the fat in the cream will prevent the whites from whipping up into full volume. And yes, of course you can use an electric mixer for these whisking steps, but I think I have a better feel for things if I'm doing it by hand. Plus, according to some recent made-up studies, the amount of calories we burn doing this by hand is exactly the same amount as one dessert. So we got that going for us, which is nice. But anyway, we'll whip our cold cream until we have like medium stiff peaks. And once that's been accomplished, we'll go ahead and lose the whisk, and we'll grab a spatula and our now probably room temp coffee and egg yolk mixture, and we'll go ahead and transfer that in. And then using a combination of folding and stirring with the tip, we will mix that until just combined. And if you're confused by recipes that say fold something in, this is what we're talking about. All right, all it means is scraping product from the side and bottom of the bowl up over the top. And as we're doing that, we're turning the bowl and giving it the occasional stir with the tip. That's right, just the tip. And then what we'll do once that coffee and egg mixture just barely disappears and everything's looking light and gorgeous, we'll go ahead and transfer in half our whites, and we will fold and stir those in using the exact same technique. And once that first addition of whites has just barely disappeared, we will add the rest, and we'll fold those in. And please do not, under any circumstances, stress about knocking too much air out of this mixture. All right, you're not going to, and even if you did, once this freezes, you're still going to have an amazingly delicious and perfectly textured dessert. In fact, the rougher you are with this, and the more air you knock out, the closer to the texture of ice cream you will get. So yes, with this recipe, the worst case scenario is basically coffee-flavored ice cream. So hopefully that makes you feel a little bit better. Oh, and some people say it's okay to have some streaks of egg white in there, so as not to overmix. I do not agree with these people. Or as we call them in the business, streakers. All right, no one's ever been eating a semifreddo and said, this is good, but I wish there were some streaks of egg whites in it. So I always fold mine until I can't see any more egg whites, at which point it's ready to transfer into whatever we're going to serve this in, which for me will be these little 4-ounce jam jars, which I think make the perfect portion, and of course come with an airtight screw-on lid. But I should mention that traditionally, this would be transferred into a plastic-lined metal loaf pan, and then frozen, and then cut and served in slices. So if you don't want small individual portions, feel free to do that. I mean, you are, after all, the Steely Dan of whether to use a Steely pan. But personally, I do enjoy these small little cube portions. And that's it. Once we have that divided up evenly, we'll go ahead and screw on the tops. And we will pop those in the freezer until completely frozen, which is going to take, I'm not sure, since I usually leave these in the freezer overnight. But anyway, the point is you got to freeze these before you serve them, which I did. And then we could definitely serve these as is, and only a real jerk would complain. But if we wanted to fancy it up a little bit, we could top this with a little bit of whipped cream, and then maybe top it with some shaved chocolate, or a light dusting of cocoa, depending on our mood. And that's it, our Tiramoussa Semifreddo is ready to more than semi-enjoy, since I'm 100% confident you are going to fully love this. And as you probably know, semifreddo means half cold, although in this context it more refers to half frozen, and that's because the texture does not get hard. All right, even fully frozen, this has a beautiful soft creamy texture on the palate, and it really is similar to a very light airy ice cream. All right, kind of a cross between a frozen custard and a coffee ice cream, with that sweet little boozy hit of marsala. All right, for something so simple and easy to make, the results really are extraordinary. Which brings us to my compelling argument portion of the program. Okay, like I mentioned, this seems more like a hot weather dessert, but I think this would be perfect for one of those really heavy holiday meals, because not only is this feather light and relatively low in the calorie department, in fact, more than half of this is air, which has 0 calories. So if you had one of these and then told someone you didn't have dessert, that would not be a lie, it would only be a half-truth, or a semi-truth if you prefer. So the fact that these are so light, I think makes it perfect after a heavy meal. But we also get that little bump of caffeine for a little bit of an after-meal pick-me-up, which may help you get through a couple more of your uncle stories. And yes, I am that uncle. But anyway, that's it. What we're calling Tiramoussa Semifreddo. Just a decadent and rich tasting dessert, but it does not feel rich and decadent. And whether you enjoy it in the heat of summer, or after a long decadent holiday meal, I really do hope you give this a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.